Hey everyone, Necromancer 1040 here. So I just wanted to bring you a kind of not it's not like a list video, but it's more like a video kind of just giving you more insight about competitive deck tips and tricks if you wanted to go to a local Yu-Gi-Oh tournament. If you haven't noticed, my voice is kind of a little hoarse right now. So I've just kind of been sick. So sorry if I seem a little if my voice doesn't sound like it usually is. But yeah, I just wanted to get this video out for you guys, and yeah, let's go through a few of the tips I thought would be very useful, especially if you want to build a more competitive deck. So yeah, let's get into it. So my first tip would just be know the meta. That would be the biggest tip to get sort of a starting point. If you don't know the meta, you're not really gonna be effective at combating the types of decks that you encounter in competitive tournaments and Yu-Gi-Oh in general. Know what are the top three, or if the meta consists of more than three decks, like five. I know that happens a lot more recently than in past years. But if you know Thunder Dragons, if you know Orcists are going to be the biggest threats in the meta, you have to consider whether you want to make a deck like Thunder Dragons or Orcist, or whether you want to make an anti-meta deck, a deck that exploits the meta's weaknesses, like that mainly takes advantage of those top tier decks' weaknesses, and then just side decks to its advantage. The other thing would be know the ban list. I know this kind of seems a little obvious, but especially if you've been out of the game for a while, you may not know what's limited or what's forbidden, and you want to really keep that into consideration when you're building your competitive meta deck, because you might think, oh hey, this one card may be very beneficial to my strategy, and then later you find out it's banned and you can't use that in a tournament. So keep that in mind when you're building this deck of yours. Um, the next thing would be deck consistency and effective side deck options. So I'll explain those two more effectively in a bit. But let's start off with deck consistency. So I know this sounds again obvious. Deck consistency. You mainly want to keep your deck to 40 to around the 40 card range. I'm not saying you can't build a competitive 60 card deck. I'm just saying it's a little more difficult to do it. Also, you do not want to build you do not want to put more cards in your deck than you have to. You just want to keep the deck very tight, as it were. You don't. You just want to use the cards that you have to use in the deck. Like for example, you want to build your deck in terms of what cards can do for you right now as opposed to what cards can do for you later. So what I mean is, like, let's say you have your starting hand and you notice most of the cards in your hand uh, take some setting up. They don't activate this turn, but they activate the next turn. That would not be a really good strategy for a competitive build, because you're mainly banking on the fact that you're just gonna set a few things, or maybe you're gonna put a few things in motion right now, and then you're gonna wait till the next turn to activate to activate their effects. Well, that's not that may blow up in your face, because your opponent's likely gonna gear their deck to mainly putting in the strategy right now and building their board right now as opposed to later. So that's kind of the reason why traps have fallen out of favor, and why you see more spell cards take precedence in today's competitive strategies. I know, like, the most popular traps are stuff like evenly matched or infinite impermanence, but you kind of notice that they do behave more in a way that spell cards do as opposed to trap cards. I know, yeah, you have to set them down if you have cards on your field, but they do have an option to where you can activate them more quickly. So what I'm saying is, for in terms of deck consistency, you want to figure out which cards can basically get you more combos and can build you faster boards in a short amount of time within the starting turn and turns after. What you also want to do is, in terms of consistency, is if your opponent does board wipe you, you want to have a backup plan. If your opponent board wipes you and then you have no recovery strategy, then your deck isn't really consistent in that sense. So you want to make sure that you have a follow up strategy, whether that entails you putting in more draw cards or your deck just having an ability to have search abilities or just more draw power in general, so you can rebuild your boards. Um, on top of consistency, you want an effective side deck. So an effective side deck is key to the meta because your deck is not always going to be prepared to take on every single deck that it faces. There's going to be one matchup or one deck that your particular build has a hard time against. So when you're building your 15 card side deck, you want to think, what is the best way to combat the meta? What sort of cards will prevent my opponent from doing what they have to do, or prevent my opponent from preventing me on building my boards or setting up my strategies? So, yeah, that's the type of mentality you want to take with the extra deck. And this next point that I'm going to get into kind of ties in with an effective side deck. Also, recognizing your deck's weaknesses. Um, you have to realize, is your deck very reliant on first turn strategies? Is your deck reliant on special summoning from the deck? Is it uh, reliant on special summoning from the hand, or is it reliant on special summoning from the grave? You have to realize that you're not only are you looking to get the drop on your opponent, your drop is looking to get your drop. Your opponent is looking to get the drop on you. Um, uh, on the flip side too. So you have to take into account, is my deck relying on let's say graveyard summons, something like Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion is going to be a real problem for you. So you may want to tack in, I guess, Called by the Grave, or you want to put in something like Dark Ruler No More. Those are probably the two most staple, effective side deck options. So you really want to take into consideration. You really want to be in the mentality of asking yourself, like, how is my opponent going to try to stop me, and how am I going to try to prevent my opponent from stopping me from what I need to do in terms of winning. So that's the type of mentality you want to bring into that sort of deck building. Um, Also, this kind of goes into what I've said before, concise deck building, um, as well as testing. If you build a very concise deck, it makes the testing part of this whole process go a little more easy for you. The reason why I say that is because you've already eliminated the fact that your deck is, in terms of consistency, not kind of convoluted and kind of all over the place. You know your deck is kind of tight from the start. So what you can work on now is seeing the cards that you want to see from the get go, and testing could be anything. Whether you test against your friends. That could be that's probably the first starting point for many people. But what I would encourage you to do is really try to test against a wide variety of people, whether if it's at your locals or if it's online. Um, Testing your deck online is probably a really good tool because you don't want to spend a bunch of money and then figure out your deck doesn't really work against a lot of other decks, whether if you figure that out online or against other people. But you want to save money in terms of deck building by first building, I guess, an online version of the deck, whether you use YGO Pro or Dual Book, or in some of my cases, I use Yugipedia. That I mean, that's not really an online matchup, but it does give you test hands, and it allows you to put together a deck that you want. Which that's another point I would recommend is figure out a way or find a online tool that allows you to give yourself test hands to see what you're going to open up with, because oftentimes what you open up with is what's going to really decide the tide of the duel. Are you going to have a really tough time because you got a bad hand, or are you going to have a really easy time because you're getting pretty consistent hands? So that's another element that you have to take into consideration. Also, what you want to do is you want to build your deck in a way that you get the way I often think about this is if I'm in the worst position possible, let's say my opponent is really beating me in, is like what's the strategy I'm going to rely upon to get me out of that situation. And that's what you really want to go for in your test hand. You want to every time you get your opening hand, you want to see which cards are going to help me get out of the worst possible situation imaginable. So that also entails loading your deck with these cards that are really going to push a lot of advantage for you. So what I'm saying is, put cards into your deck that basically push as much plays as possible. You want to benefit from, I like let's say one card generating triggering other effects that may allow you to search, and in turn allows you to revive something or summon something from your hand. So what I'm saying is put cards in your deck that do more than one thing and do more than two things. You want just one card to do as much as possible for you at the moment. I know that sounds kind of trivial, but you'd be surprised how many people often forget that because they're usually trying to build around this one very narrow strategy, and that's fine if you're building a fun deck. But in terms of competitive play, that's not really the focus of the competitive kind of deck build. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up my competitive tips for people getting into more competitive Yu-Gi-Oh. These are just kind of more of my personal opinions and just kind of what I picked up throughout the years, and I hope you found them useful. But yeah, I just want to apologize for the lack of uploads. I know it just kind of seems a little dry as of late in terms of content. But yeah, this flu season's kind of hit me hard. So my voice has just come back in this past few days. So I thought I'd just get this video out as soon as possible to you guys, and I hope you liked it. Look forward to more content. Yeah, I'm really excited to bring more stuff to you guys, and I guess I'll see you later. All right, I guess I'll see you then. Bye.